You mentioned about the flat four that fell off the back of the guy's truck at lunchtime, which makes me think of the Scepter that's upstairs. Do any of you guys know why is it that Studebaker, unlike GM, Ford, Chrysler, who trotted out all their concept cars and showed them at every show and at every event, and those cars were front and center, Studebaker didn't really take its concepts or its future visions out on the circuit, so to speak. And why was that?
To my understanding, the budgets that like the big three spent on their show cars was probably close to Studebaker's entire styling budget for a given year. And I think it was, in the Bob Burke book, they mentioned that their typical show car was one of the standard models with maybe a fancy paint scheme and some extra chrome and interiors. One of their most popular show cars was in fact the 53 Starliner, which started out its life as a show car, and Bob Burke designed it, with an eye towards production, and that's how we have one of our favorite Studebakers. But like the Packard Predictor is probably as close as the Studebaker Packard Corporation had to a major show car, and that vehicle survives today. I think mainly just the economies of undertaking such a project.
Mark, you and I have talked about this. One of the interesting things about Studebaker, obviously getting back to the necessity is the mother of invention, and they have to think perhaps out of the box unlike everybody else. One of the things I know that appeals to you are the color combinations and the trim combinations, and they were really kind of ahead of the game of everybody else in the 50s, and especially even in the early 60s, the interiors were really ahead of their price competition. Any comments you might want to make about that?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to mention that I was not told I could use notes, and Andy's got, I can't figure out how he drew all those notes up while he's driving, 9.5 up. You're not supposed to write and drive like texting and driving.
Well, I wish you'd said that 12 hours ago.
Yeah, colors. The color combinations drive you nuts. The 58 had 32 color combinations because you could flip the roof and the accents on the fins with the body, and they have the body flipped with the accent. And I think some of that is trying to make what looks like it's a new model. So you got to keep adding colors, changing colors. Because they don't have the money to put on more trim or more chrome. So when we restore a car, what drives me the craziest is choosing the color that I think looks best for that particular car. And we'll have color focus groups, and so I always try to match an authentic color from the year to the car.
So, go ahead, Pat. You were gonna say something.
I just want to add in, when we were talking about the stylist before, the one that everybody forgets is Bob Marcs, who did the 66s. And that kind of ties in with this, because his philosophy with the 66 model is, we're only going to have a new grille and some new side trim, so let's focus on the interior. Because when you think about it, where do we spend most of our time with the car? It's inside, not outside. And so his idea was, let's put in some really, really nice fabric, the sort of stuff you see in a Lincoln or a Cadillac or a Chrysler, and people will appreciate that. So if you look at the 66 models, they really, they've got a beautiful, beautiful interior. And I wish, he had ideas for 67, and of course in my book, I show the pictures of, he had planned out models based on the Lark, basic body, clear to 1970. And he had a lot of good ideas, and that was part of it.
Well, I just remembered the most unusual request I had. A guy called and had questions on the paint, and thank you, Mark, for jogging that memory, and wanted me to describe the color over the phone to him so he could get it mixed. I didn't seem to think that was a very good idea.
I always say that to people when they ask me how much is my house worth, and I always say hold up a little closer to the phone, because they always expect you to give them an answer over the phone without seeing their house. So I appreciate that very much. Mark, you touched upon something else when you were talking about restoring Hawks. I was going to ask you, what's the greatest challenge that you find in restoring cars? And it may not be, sourcing the parts, and it may not have been that some of them started out as Flintstonemobiles, but what do you find the biggest challenge in restoring the Hawks that you do?
The backlight for a 1958 Starlight, unobtainium, I guess the guys say. The plastic pieces, the plastic badge on a 56 President Classic, it has a blue emblem instead of the reds. I'm trying to find that, impossible. Thank you, Joe. Help me out finding those. So it's, you can fabricate the metal, you can buy the glass, usually, do the best you can on the fabrics, but the plastic, if there's nobody out there doing the steering wheels or those we drive crazy.
So you finish a car, and for those who don't know, Marc's cars are really pretty over the top, spectacular, and arguably probably some of the finest that you'll see anywhere. So you go to a Concours, and I know this because we're at the same Concours together, and you're in a class, and now you're with a Fleetwood Eldorado, or an Eldorado Brome, and a Mark II, and then your Studebaker's in that class, and you come home with first place. What is the reaction that people have, judges as well as the public, when they see your Studebaker in comparison to what might be described as some pretty heavy machinery?
Well, I did give that some thought. I think there's three usual responses. One is, that car's over-restored. And I say, you think? I want the car to look like the way the clay looked in the designer studio, not the way it looked when it came off the production line. So yes, the panel gaps are as perfect as we can get them. I said, yes, so it is over-restored. Thank you. The next one I get is, you're crazy doing that to a Studebaker. Why on earth would you do that to a Studebaker? And I say, because I don't like Cadillacs. Then the third one I get is, I had no idea that Studebaker made such beautiful cars. And I'm like, thank you very much. Those are the
And you're the person I like to talk to, that person that makes that comment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very cool. What Hawk or what car, what Studebaker is not in your collection that you would like to have? Uh-oh, did I stump you? That was on the list, by the way.
I can answer that for you.
Yeah, I have the queue. I'd have to say my problem now is living long enough because I've got them in chunks to restore them. So I have every post-war VA hardtop Studebaker. So I finally got a Super Hawk, a Packard Hawk, a Sky Hawk.
You don't have a 400, right?
That's the one he wants.
See, somebody figured it out. That's where I was going with this.
Is that Ray?
No, it's not Ray, but it's Ray's good friend.
Okay, well tell Ray I'm still waiting. So, yeah. That's the one I don't have, is the 400.
I was heading in that direction. Pat, I don't know, I actually don't know this. Do you have any
I'm
Studebakers?
actually Sans Studebaker right now.
Okay, so if you could pick.
Oh, an Avanti.
Okay.
Yeah, I love Avanti. I've always loved Avanti, and yes, dear, I will get an Avanti.
We should have Dave Kinney
And
here.
probably
Right?
sometime later I'll tell you about it.
How many Avantis has Dave Kinney had?
All of them.
All of them. That's what the joke always is. It's all of them. Andy, you have Studebakers, but what
do.
would be your, if you, aside from what you have, what would you like to have in your collection of as your favorite, or perhaps the Studebaker that you don't have you'd like to have?
In terms of my personal collection? Or
Yes.
Oh, my personal collection. An Avanti, but a specific Avanti. Studebaker designer Bob Daler, his job at Studebaker was to take the 8-scale clay that came in from Palm Springs and turn it into a full-size automobile that could be built and produced. And he bought an Avanti from my hometown Studebaker dealer in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, because they were friends from years back. And he did his own little modifications how he wanted the Avanti to be. And just a few things he took off, like shaved all the trim, but he had custom made, because he hated the Studebaker 4-speed shift linkage, so he made like his own little shift linkage and made like little emblems of his own personal touches for it. And I know where the car is, but my wife has also pointed out that we do not have any more garage space. Actually, she pointed that out before the last Studebaker I brought home. I'm sure it's a familiar refrain.
You alluded to this earlier, but perhaps something we can talk about next. Why is it that the Avanti 40 years, hung around for 40 years after Studebaker went out of business? It's a fascinating thought that any car could have that kind of staying power and remain in production, albeit in limited form, but still be around and the public still responded to the car. And that's for all three of you guys.
I'll go.
Okay.
I think it's because it's a beautiful car, and when it came out, it was so far advanced in styling that it looked like it came from the future. So yeah, 63, 64 was attractive, and 73, 74 was attractive, and 83 and 84. It just it's almost a timeless design. And again, it's one of those few really fast, agile American Grand Touring cars. Something you can take 4 people and their luggage and drive at a blistering pace all day long in style and comfort. It's a remarkable car.
I've often said the Avanti story is the most unlikely one in automotive history. The scriptwriters from Hollywood couldn't come up with this. The company's they want to build a new car, and they only have 14 months to do it, which by the way is absolutely ridiculous in the industry. 3 to 5 years is the typical cycle, and that's rushed. I mean, Ford took about 3 years with the Mustang to bring that in, from sketches to production. It's only in production for 18 months as a Studebaker, and then 2 South Bend businessmen go to a bank in South Bend. And I was like, how did this meeting with the loan officer go? Yes, we'd like to, we're car dealers and we'd like to build automobiles. Okay. And what did you have in mind? The Avanti. You mean the car that Studebaker couldn't make a go of? Yes, that's the one. Have you guys ever built cars before? No, we haven't. And, okay, here's your loan, And like Pat touched on, the Avanti, I wasn't around when the Avanti came out, but to look at it, it never looks really of any one particular time period. You see some of the dealer films where they're promoting the Avanti, they show the Avanti pulling onto traffic, I think it's somewhere around Chicago. And it just looks like it was dropped out of a spaceship in the middle of all these kind of very perpendicular 60s sedans. And even in the 70s, it's like, it is not of any one time, yet now we are kind of in today's age, we now look back at it, we know it's not of this time, but you can't really place it retroactively either.
Pat, comments? Mark, I'm sorry.
I think it's remarkable because it's a timeless design that was a great risk, very risky to bring that car out, and it was saleable. And as I understand it, the Corvette lost money for 4 or 5 years, and GM could handle that. And the Corvette is still with us today. Unfortunately, Studebaker didn't have the staying power, and then once the Studebaker quit making them, the other folks would come along. They just didn't have the scale of the staying power. But I often think that if it was the Chevrolet Avanti, it'd still be with us.
Do you guys think the merger with Packard was a good move or a big mistake? That's a big question.
It was necessary because if Studebaker didn't merge with someone, there wasn't going to be a 1955 or 56 Studebaker. Pat mentioned the sales war in 1954 and how ill-prepared Studebaker was from not only a product standpoint, but also a labor standpoint and financial standpoint to deal with that. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, Pat, but I think the figure I saw was, it wasn't just the independence, but I think Chrysler was off like almost 25% from 1953 to 1954. Packard had cash, Studebaker needed cash. I'm not going to get into the whole did Studebaker kill Packard discussion here, but it was really necessary for Studebaker to continue.
Gentlemen, any comments on that?
Yeah, I could write a book on that.
Didn't you already?
The Studebaker-Packard merger was good for Studebaker because they were burning through cash at such a furious rate that I think it would have run out of money in 55 or 56 without Packard's money to burn. So in that regard, it kept Studebaker going until Harold Churchill could put together a program that allowed them to continue building cars until 1966. But it was bad for Packard because it burned through all their money. And they were left outside the tent, so to speak. I've always felt that if Packard and Nash had merged, those two companies would still be here today. And the only way that Studebaker could have stayed is if all four of them had gotten together, because it just had to spread the costs around to as many units as possible. And it's a shame that they couldn't come to an agreement on it, because it would have made a very good car company. It would have had a very broad range, a lot of dealers, and they could have made a go of it. Sharing one or two bodies across 4 different brands, or 6 if you count Clipper, as a separate brand. It could have worked well. It's very sad when I think about it, but that's what happened.
One last thing before we turn it over to the audience for questions. Mark, you're working on another book. Tell us about your book, and then I'll ask Pat the same thing that, you didn't know that was coming, did you? That was not on the list. And then we'll ask Pat about what he's working on. Then I have some questions for Andy about South Bend.
I started the book I'm on now to be a book about the Hudson Italia, and it's morphing into the end of the Hudson Motor Car Company, so it's going to be a book about Hudson.
An epistle or a book?
Oh, it'll be a book. It'll be a historical novel, so it's about Frank Spring and trying to save Hudson, so it's going to be more of a novel approach.
Pat, what are you working on?
Well, I just finished 2 books. One is 1001 Facts About Jeep, which is the 5th book I've written on Jeep. And hopefully it's the last, because this one, 1001 Facts About Jeep, drove me crazy. I mean, it was so hard to do. It's the only time I can remember when writing felt like work. The other book I did was, that's coming out later on this year. Both of them are coming out later on this year. The other one is Lost Car Legends, the American Independent Car Companies, 1945 to 1985. And what it's going to be, of course, is the ones that we know, Kaiser, Fraser, and Studebaker and Nash, but also dozens of the smaller car companies that sprung up after World War II, like the Davis and Crosley, of course, and just so many of the small Tucker. There were, gosh, I don't know, probably about 200 little car companies that sprang up like mushrooms after World War II, and they all had their day. Some did very well, some did terrible. Some were outright frauds, like the Dale automobile, which came out in the 70s. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but it was a 3-wheeled car that they said was going to get 70 miles to a gallon of gas, cost $2,000, be virtually indestructible, and it was a complete fraud. The car couldn't do any of those things at all, and the woman who was the president of the company was not really a woman, it was a female impersonator, and just a crazy, and there's a lot of stories like that. So this book was a lot of fun to write, and I'm hoping it does well, because I really enjoy doing it. What am I working on now? Right now I'm working on the defense industries of South Bend, Indiana, which I'm pretty happy about. And I'm also, I just signed a contract to write a book on Dodge trucks.
Very good. Andy, tell us what's, and perhaps you have another book on the menu as well, but tell us if that is the case. But what's happening at the Studebaker National Museum and what's happening in South Bend? Because I think that's important to let people know that things are alive and well in South Bend.
Yeah, no imminent book projects, kicking around a few ideas right now, but nothing I want to put out here because then I'll have to go home and write it. But as far as things at the museum, we just came off our second best attendance year ever in 2018. Our first best attendance year was 2017, so we're hoping to keep the streak alive here going into 2019. Have our second annual Concord de Elegance at Capture Home, graciously moderated by Mr. Bill Rothermel, also one of our judges for that event. And Mark, I believe, did you not take home the most elegant Studebaker award last year at that event? Yes, yeah, with Marc's 58 Golden Hawk. That is coming up on Saturday, July 13th.
And it's not just Studebaker.
No, this is all makes. We actually have, we pretty much were guaranteed to have a class of Studebakers each year, but we're featuring Lincoln as our classic mark this year. We have a class of Italian sports cars, Euro-American hybrids, European economy cars. If you haven't seen a Fiat Jolly, you should come out to South Bend in July and check that out. But that's Saturday, July 13th. Our current feature exhibit is Streamliners, looking at kind of what I touched on earlier with the Studebaker Land Cruiser. We look at how the industrial design field really got its jump start in the 1930s as we started rounding the edges off cars and started paying attention more how they went through the air instead of just building a brick that you sat in. Starting a Cars and Coffee event down at the museum, actually. First Saturday of the month from 8 to 10 o'clock. As it implies, there's bring your cars and we'll have coffee. Those prove to be very popular with our fellow museums in the area, so we're going to give that a shot. And just a whole host of great things going on at the museum. South Bend, Indiana, if you haven't been to South Bend recently, I know some of you come out annually for the May Swap Meet, but if you haven't been there since the last International, a lot of changes have come down the pipe. South Bend has invested a lot of resources into refurbishing its downtown and also redevelopment of the Studebaker corridor sites there. Building 86, the body plant, is now being renovated into a high-tech hub, a business incubator, and just a whole host of projects going on in there. The building has never looked better. It looks very much like if Albert Kahn designed a building for the 21st century, that's what they're doing there. And just a whole bunch of growth on the Studebaker plant site, many things dealing with the tech industry. Apparently the largest fiber optic line in the country runs right down through the downtown South Bend to the rail right-of-way, which was right next to the Studebaker plant. So the infrastructure from Studebaker's time, having redundant power supplies, very stable foundations, is exactly what the cloud, if you have data storage, that's exactly what you need. So that's actually proven to be a great boon for that, for the redevelopment of South Bend.
Thank you to all of our panelists tonight. If you'd all please take